All right. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. We are on From Pain to Passion, both a YouTube and a podcast where we share people's stories, their experiences of being in a really dark space, and how, because of that journey and that dark period, that now that it has become fuel for them to give life to others, for them to help change other people's lives because of that. Rather than it being a hindrance, it become really truly the fuel to just make massive impact in people's lives and throughout the world. So today we have a really special guest. His name is Matt Engel. He is a Marine. He has just an incredible story of darkness and deep pain, and then incredible and beautiful resurrection that is changing people's lives, and he's able to walk with people, and it's really beautiful. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. Matt, first of all, thank you so much for being here and being willing to share your story, because these are, whenever we share our stories, those are deep, personal, vulnerable things, and it can be a little intimidating to share that, but you have started to take this story so public because it is helping change people's lives, and you're walking with so many other military men and men in general. So go ahead and start. Tell us a little bit about your story. What was your backdrop? What was your background? And where did we start with you?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think when people think military veteran and we're talking about from pain to really getting your message out there and something fruitful, we kind of have an idea where the story is going to go. And I was just reflecting back and looking at a lot of my fellow veterans and where they're at right now. I really start to see how unique it is, the story that I've been given and have been given to share here. And so just so excited to be able to share this and perhaps let it be a little bit of a guide for those people, those veterans in particular here, or first responders that, just in the light of the work that we do, we encounter what I would say is the darker side of life. And then people ask us to talk about it.
Mm,
And boy, oh boy, sometimes it's like taking a wound and just opening up and having somebody thrust their hand into it, and there's a time for that, uh, but it's not always right there in the beginning. And
yeah.
so that was something certainly that I came to learn. But really, before I got into the military, I was just like your typical American boy here. I ended up going to the Naval Academy, got my commission in the United States Marine Corps after I did that, and just wanted to lead men in combat. And but I had a problem, and my problem was that I was deeply insecure about who I was, my ability really to lead, and what I thought a leader needed to be able to deliver to his men. See, it was 2006 when I got my commission, and here it was 2003 is really when the Iraq war started to take off, and here we were. We had people that were veterans in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I was showing up a 23-year-old lieutenant, wet behind the ears, like having nothing but just training stories in my pocket here. And I was meant to lead these men that had 5 tours already overseas. And I was thinking to myself, what could I possibly give to these men uh, that could be of any benefit, of any leadership to them? And so, really, in that moment, when I first got to my platoon, there was a lot of masks that I wore. I was doing a lot of hiding. See, I thought I needed to be perfect. I'd encountered these instructors at my infantry officer course that were just titans of men, and I thought that I needed to be just like them. And I thought the course was going to make me like them. Well, the reality of it was I got done with that 3-month course, and all I knew deep in my core was that I was not these men. And so if I was not these men, how was I going to lead these other men? How was I going to fulfill this desire to really be a gift to these Marines, to these warriors? And I didn't have an answer to that. And so I hid. I hid. I did a lot of office work. I put the office in officer, as I say, and I really led from a distance.
Mhm.
And I can remember the day we said that we found out we were going to Afghanistan. We thought we were going to Iraq, and it was going to be kind of just some, it was starting to wind down a little bit, at least some of the kinetic fight that we were past Fallujah and that. And we thought we were just kind of going for a shut the lights off kind of a mission. And all of a sudden we found out we were going to a brand new mission in Afghanistan.
Wow.
And I remember just the fear that was there, because how was I going to hide now was
Mm.
kind of the thought behind it all. Well, anyways, we made it over there, and I had a platoon that actually my platoon just split up, and I lost my platoon. They split up and they reinforced. It was just the nature of the way that my platoon worked. It reinforced other platoons, and so I ended up with a smaller unit out in the middle of a remote post in southern Afghanistan, and there was about 80 of us. And we were living on an outpost about the size of a football field in the middle of nowhere. And I tell you, nowhere. It was flat. Like people think Afghanistan, they think of really rocky terrain. We were down south. It was just flat, wide open desert. There were some mountains that we had to the north, but I mean, there was nothing when we showed up there but a couple of mud huts. We built an outpost from scratch,
Wow.
and we just stood a post, and we started going out and conducting what's called counterinsurgency operations. We're going out and we're with the people, we're looking for the enemy, we're trying to find those leverage points to be able to really sell our story to the local population and find the insurgents and ultimately hunt down and kill the insurgents. And uh, when I was over there, one of the things I realized was that when you're living on a football field with 80 people, there's no place to hide. And that was a blessing. It really was a blessing, because when you start to get to know one another, you start to get to know their flaws. See, I wouldn't let myself be vulnerable to my Marines and even reveal my flaws, because the thought I had in my head was, as soon as they saw that I was imperfect, then they would never follow me. I would never be able to lead. They would never accept me. They'd never love me. But the truth was, I started to see all of their flaws here too. And even these people that I'd put up on this pedestal that I'd really made idols out of, I started to see their humanity. And that started to set conditions for us to really enter into an authentic relationship. And there was a thing that happened over there. And I like to say, I fell in love with my Marines. I fell in love with them. And I wanted nothing but to just really serve them during this time. And really, I was still searching for that service. Like, Matt Ingold, how was I called to be a gift specifically to these men? Because I still didn't have the combat experience that all of them had. Still wasn't the greatest technician, still wasn't the greatest marksman that was out there. What was my gift going to be? And this was something that was just heavy on my heart. So on one particular day, I thought the opportunity came for me to be this gift that I longed to give to my Marines. And I was so excited for it. You see, when you're overseas and you're fighting a counterinsurgency warfare, as a Marine, you train to fight, you train to kill, you train to engage the enemy and be victorious. And you long for that moment that you get to prove yourself on the battlefield. And for me, I thought that moment came. We had a unit that was being ambushed, and they were about 7 miles away from where our location was. And they called for air support, and there's a limited people that could really come in and do that air support. And I had been specifically trained for this. And so I answered that call, and I called for 2 F-18s to show up on station. And so I'm talking to the unit that's in contact, and I'm on my radio, and I'm looking at my computer screen, and I can see what those F-18s are seeing. And I can see this gray screen where they have I could see the burst coming from a side of a building where it looked like they were shooting some sort of rounds. And I could also see the impacts of our unit that was out there firing back. And I talked back and forth. This guy finally got positive identification of where the fires were coming from. I talked the aircraft on. I gave the cleared hot. And a moment later, I saw this flash on my screen, and that building that was there was gone. It was gone. And there was a little moment of eruption, I guess, in the command center where I was at, and people started giving high fives, and I wanted to do that. I'd finally done my job as a Marine. I'd finally had my day, so to speak, in the fight, and I thought it was going to feel different, because in that moment, I could just say that while everybody was high-fiving, I just didn't feel like celebrating. There was something that indicated that something wasn't right. And moments later, we started to get some confirmations to that as our local contacts started to call in. And slowly, as those calls came in, started to reveal that there was an enemy in that building. There was nothing but innocent civilians that were in that building I just leveled. And so my buddy who was with me said, you know what, Matt, we gotta send a battle damage assessment team to go out there and take a look. And I didn't go back. I stayed back, but he went out. But I was in the command center as that battle damage assessment, that BDA started to come in. And the first thing I heard was they pulled a woman from the rubble.
Mm.
Shortly after that, it was a young boy, and then it was a young girl, and it was just like the people they were pulling from the rubble just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, almost like those Russian nesting dolls that they have, where it's just.
Right.
And I just kept waiting for them to say, hey, we just pulled a military age male with an AK-47 by his side out of the rubble, like just some sort of justification for what I had done. And it just didn't come. And finally, my platoon sergeant looked over at me as all this terrible news was coming in. He goes, so you think you really want to be here?
Mm.
And again, this mask bravado came up, and I said, yeah, I got it. Don't sweat it. Don't sweat it. I need to be here. I need to be here. And I remember the moment that radio cracked, and the radio operator on the other end said, they just pulled a baby from the rubble. People say when they have moments like this that they feel like their soul leaves them. And I know what that feels like.
Mm.
It was that moment when I heard that, there were no masks that I could put on at that point that could hide me any further. I was exposed, completely exposed. And I felt like everything that had made me human, anything that I'd ever received in love, and all the affirmations from my parents and the hugs and the I love yous, none of that intimate experience was more intimate than what I was experiencing right at that moment.
Wow.
That moment was the realest experience I had ever experienced in my entire life.
Mm.
And the realest experience I'd ever experienced was also the darkest encounter with death and destruction and human frailty that I had ever encountered. And I just felt my soul leave me in that moment. I just felt like a monster. I felt like anything that had made me human was gone, and I was just an animal. And all I could feel was people looking at me and seeing me, and not seeing this monster. And at that point, I got up and I left, and I went outside. I'm not a smoker, but I just started bumming cigarettes. All I could tell you in that moment, I just wanted to feel something.
Mhm.
I just wanted to connect with something. I wanted a distraction, anything that could take me away from where I was in that present moment. And so I'm just sitting there and I'm smoking and I'm pacing back and forth. And I remember there was a moment where, as I'm pacing, this thought comes in my head. And it was almost like a whisper over my shoulder. And this voice, it just said, Matt, you know what you've done? You've killed a baby. You've committed the unforgivable sin. There's no hope for you. You're damned where you stand. That was the words, you are damned where you stand. And I remember I physically nodded my head in agreement, with this. And at that moment, I just dropped my cigarette and I walked into my tent and I just curled up in a fetal position. Like, I never thought I'd be this person, but there I was in a fetal position, 24-year-old, officer, leader of Marines. And I was a complete emotional casualty at that moment,
Mm.
curled up in this little ball. And I got physically ill. I just remember retching at the side of my bed. And it's hard to describe the darkness. The way I like to describe, or the way that I describe it to people is that I know that there's a hell. I know there's a hell because I experienced it. I lived it. I got a real taste of it. And it's a place where you just are utterly despairing. There's no remedy. There's no hope. You're a corpse. You're just an absolute shell of a person. And I never want anybody to experience that. But that was rock bottom. That was rock bottom. And I'm grateful that was my rock bottom, because I've heard so many stories of so many men and so many women that could have been their rock bottom, and they kept finding ways to fall deeper and deeper and deeper for years following. And I remember that moment, for some reason, here it was, I'd grown up Catholic, and I would consider myself fairly devout. But in this moment, I felt so far away from God. I wanted to run from anything that was good. And how could God love me in a moment like this? But for some reason, I prayed. I said one of the only prayers that I could remember in that moment, and it's this old Catholic prayer. Some people may know it. It's called the Hail Mary. It's this biblical Hail Mary full of grace, and you're just talking to the mother of Jesus and asking for her to pray for you and intercede for you. And in that moment after I prayed that, I fell asleep. And I woke up about an hour and a half later, and I just felt terrible. And I thought to myself, I'm going to wake up like this for the rest of my life. This is the rest of my life. I'm going to wake up feeling this for the rest of my life. Wake up to this nightmare for the rest of my life. But also there was a little hope that I experienced there. And oddly enough, I remember thinking the thought, well, Matt, at least you slept. And like, corpses don't sleep. Zombies don't sleep. Like the Walking Dead, they don't sleep. And I just took some consolation in that little bit of humanity in having slept. And for me, from that moment, I just didn't know where things were going to go. But they started to go up. And one of the first things that happened, and again, my story is very much, incorporates my faith tradition as a Catholic. And I know there's some people that may be listening that may not necessarily have faith, or they may not necessarily know the traditions of our church. And so I'll speak to that and try to bring it into context so people can understand. But something that's just very important for Catholics is to be able to receive Holy Communion. And Holy Communion is this, we do it every Sunday. We go to Mass and we receive the body and blood of Jesus, what we literally believe to be the body and blood of Jesus, that which he commissioned and gave to the apostles at the Last Supper. And it's carried on through the traditions of the church. And here we were in the middle of Afghanistan. There's no priests, for miles. I mean, we weren't going to Mass. We certainly weren't receiving any of this. But I got a phone call from our JAG officer. That's a military lawyer. And he said, Matt, I got to come out there and do an investigation. It's going to be difficult. I'm going to have to ask you all kinds of questions. And then he said, but fear not. I'm going to bring you Holy Communion. You see, before we had left our central base in Kandahar, they had daily Mass in this tent. And I was going to it. And there's one other person in our battalion of 1,200 people that was going to Mass. And it was our JAG officer. And we got very close, just attending Mass together and receiving the Lord's Supper. And he knew that in this moment where I just felt so far from God, that he wanted to bring me this consolation. And when I look back at that moment now, and I can see that this is like a moment where I felt so far from God and so unloved and wanted to really run and hide from God in this moment, that here I had God willing to come to me in the flesh across 40, 50 kilometers of minefields to make it to me, not to just be with me, but to be united with me. And I can look back now, and that moment when I received Holy Communion there, being really the most intimate moment of my life. Because it's one thing for somebody to say, I love you when you're at your best, right?
Absolutely.
It's pretty easy. But when you're at your worst, when you're in a place you're most unloved, most despicable, when you've just killed a baby,
Mm.
and you have a God that comes and says, I want to be one with you, not despite your sin, but even in the midst of it, even in the midst of your darkness, I want to abide with you and be with you. It transforms you.
Mm.
And really, from that moment on, I was a new creation. And it didn't happen overnight. I mean, there were a lot of experiences where the Lord started to open my heart up at retreats and in prayer before Jesus in these little small churches. And I received, there's times where I even received these kind of prayerful visualizations, these images. I had people pray over me and just give me these words of, I remember my sister when I got home, and she didn't really know much of my story, but she said, Matt, she prayed over me and she said, Matt, I have this vision of you at the foot of the cross, and you're crouched over and you're just sobbing at the foot of the cross.
Mm.
And there are these 8 people that are trying to pick you up. And there were 8 people that were killed in that drop that day.
Oh, wow.
And there was, oh, I know.
Mm.
And it was just it was so beautiful to be able to, even through that like guided imagery prayer, which isn't just like fantasy imagination. Like there's something very real about this and very healing about this. I was able to start to even form a relationship with these people in death, like on the other side of death, to form a relationship with these people and ask for their forgiveness. And when I say this, when I say ask for their forgiveness, let me clarify. I'm in no way a pacifist. I know that war requires killing, and I know that I'm not I'm not in the Marine Corps anymore. But it's not because I don't believe that there's wars that still need to be fought, and violent wars that still need to be fought. As tragic as it is, it's a tragedy. It really is.
Mhm.
Um, but um, I lost my train of thought here for a second. Um,
Ask for forgiveness.
Ask for forgiveness, but also I needed to really look at my heart here and see, okay, like was there something here that I myself, man, like I really, where I wasn't just the pure victim here, where I was part of the, or perhaps even the villain in this. And I'd say this is something that is very, very, very important, especially because nowadays it's very, very, very easy to cast ourselves as the victims.
Mhm.
And in some ways it's even lauded in our culture to be a victim and play that card. And there's a storyteller by the name of Donald Miller. And I remember listening to a talk by him, and he said, you can always identify who the victim is in the story because they never change. They never change. They're the same person that they were in the beginning of the story and the end of the story. And why is that? Well, the victim is just a victim to their circumstances. They don't have to change because nothing is wrong with them. Everything's wrong with the circumstances outside of them. And so all the victim has to do is blame, but they never have to take responsibility. And only when we take responsibility can we actually start to grow and change and really be transformed and become something better than we were before the actual tragedy, adversity, trauma that we experienced.
Mhm.
And sometimes taking responsibility means not necessarily taking assuming any sort of blame, but it's just saying, you know what, I'm going to choose not to be a victim to this anymore, right? And choose to start to move on. But when I look back and I saw reflected on my own heart during this, I saw a place where I was the villain. And the place was, you see, I saw that by this drop, by killing this presumed enemy, it was going to exalt me to a place, to a status where I could finally be accepted amongst my peers. And to that extent that I desired to kill for that reason,
Mhm.
I was using these people as a means to an end. I was using them for my own self-aggrandizement.
Mhm.
And that's evil. That's always wrong. That's disordered.
Mhm.
And so I had to acknowledge that that was a sin that I had in my heart, and I needed to repent of that. And there was tremendous healing and freedom that came from acknowledging that, always in light of there's a God that is willing to forgive me for anything that I have done, anything. And I knew this because I'd experienced this intimate, abiding love with a
Wow.
God that, again, didn't want to just climb in the hole with me, but wanted to be one with me in that darkness. It's called mercy. That type of love is called mercy. And
Mm.
mercy comes from the Greek misericordiae, which means mise, a heart that gives itself to those in misery. Misericordiae, a heart that meets us in our place of darkness and deprivation. And this is really what I would say is the antidote, the cure, the panacea to any trauma, any adversity that we experience is merciful love.
Yeah.
Maria, before we started, you were talking about, hey, you know what? Oftentimes when people are in the depths here, they don't want somebody telling them what they should do to get out of it. They just want somebody to climb in the hole and be there with them and just love them in that moment and be a brother or a sister to them in that moment and not require anything of them. But it also doesn't mean that we're climbing into the hole and we're pitching tent and we're making camp and we're staying there ourselves. And we're saying that the person is their best future is staying in that hole either. There's an element of encouragement, but it always that love and that commitment always needs to come first.
Yes.
You don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And this is where I think there's a problem that a lot of veterans that I speak to, they have a tough time interacting with people at the VA because they think they're just paid, they're just hired help, but they don't know this versus talking with a brother or sister that they fought with and being able to just have that camaraderie of just being able to sit there and not have to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a tremendous amount of communication that's taking place.
Mm.
And there's zero judgments that's taking place in that moment.
That's so powerful. Oh my goodness, just sit here and cry for a little bit and then we'll come back out. That's amazing. Just hearing you share such an experience of just depth and darkness, and at the same time, how this God who you couldn't even look at in some ways in that moment, how like he came to you, and how through this faith experience and in a very real way, this darkness, this depth propelled just a greater intimacy. And also now that you've come out of this space, and I know there's, we've talked a little bit and I've heard a couple other interviews that you've done. There's so much to all of this, and there's a million other little things I know that you could add.
Yeah.
You are now doing just incredible, beautiful work and helping so many other veterans and helping people. Can you share, obviously that space fueled, you can tell you're so passionate now about helping others, and you can tell about getting this message out, that there's hope, that there's mercy, that there's forgiveness, that we don't have to be victims. Because it's true, sometimes when we go through a rough space, we want to hang out there too long, and we want to stay in that place. And there is that happy meeting and letting someone come in there, you're in it with them, but then you also are helping to pull them out as well, and to give them that hope and that mercy. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and how that fueled what you're doing to just bring hope and to bring mercy and love and just a brotherhood to people?
Sure. Yeah. I said at the beginning of the program here that there's a time when we're called to open up our wounds and allow someone to put their hand in the side.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I'm drawing from a scripture here that some of you may be familiar with, and it's the scripture of Doubting Thomas. And it's after the resurrection of Jesus, and Jesus shows up in the upper room. Thomas isn't there, and then all his friends tell him when they see him, it's like, hey, Jesus was here. And he says, I won't believe until I put my hand in his side and I put my fingers in the nail marks. I won't believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you really empathize with Thomas here. Like, he is so wounded by, perhaps his abandonment of Christ in his hour of need, by having lost a friend. He's just mourning, and he's just feels like people are toying with him, and he wants to believe, but he needs to have a much more intimate experience
Mm.
Doesn't get any more intimate than this, because Christ shows up and he says, hey, Thomas, I want you to believe. So take your hand and put it in my side. Put your fingers in the nail marks. And there's this beautiful, beautiful image by this painter. His Italian painter. His name's Caravaggio. And it's called The Incredulity of Thomas, of St. Thomas. And it's got this picture of Jesus taking Thomas's hand and holding it and thrusting it into his side. And you can see that it's not really comfortable for Jesus. He's kind of got a wince on his face, but Thomas, his eyes are wide open as they could possibly be. And we know in that moment from scriptures, it says that he exclaims, my Lord and my God.
Mm.
Through that encounter, through that penetrating encounter with a wound that has been redeemed, that is no longer a place of death, but it's a place of life, Thomas encountered this experience of conversion, a transformative experience. And this is what I believe I've been given the ability to do now. The wound that I have experienced that has been transformed by Christ, I can now invite people to experience this. And it's uncomfortable. It is. But it's also no longer an encounter with death, and it's an encounter with life. And when people are walking around with holes in them, it's all the more testament that life has triumphed here, right? Versus somebody that everything's all healed up and everything looks fine. But when people are walking around and they've experienced some awful, awful things, whether it's abuse as a child, or they've gone through a terrible divorce, or they've lost their children, their kids have died, or they've lost a parent or a friend, or they've had a near-death experience, or they've done something terrible, they've killed, they've raped, they've murdered, they've stolen, whatever it is,
Right.
to know that you can, like, that can all be redeemed. And those people go through these transformations and their life becomes a walking witness to eternity, to this beauty of a
Mm.
God really that loves us. But also they enter into just they start to live heaven now in a lot of ways. And it's like that like cheesy 80s songs, ooh, heaven is a place on earth. Like it's there's some, these are twisted mystics that are revealing something that's very true, and it can be encountered. And so where is this leading for me? Well, I had kind of, when I first got out of the military, I desired to help other men and women come to the same healing that I had experienced. It was primarily through just my faith journey. And I joined a men's ministry for a while, and there was a great season of being able to run healing retreats for guys. And these were men specifically here. I was working with men that had experienced a lot of different traumas. Some of them were court ordered there. A lot of different, some of them were veterans.
Mm.
And that was just great to be able to witness
Mhm.
how this redeemed wound could be a gift to somebody else.
Wow.
And then I stepped away from that for a season as I honestly, I just kind of stepped away. And when I did, I lost something. And
Mm.
recently, though, I was invited to share my story for a online retreat program for men called Rise, the Rise program by Cardinal Studios. And they took my story, which is the one that you saw, and they featured it as one of their 4 witness testimonies in their 30-day online retreat. And I thought this thing was fine. My story was just going to live behind this gated wall, and I would really have like kind of a few people that saw it. But then they said, hey, you know what? We're looking to use your story as a promo, and they just put it out on Facebook. And now, like, I had all of these, I'm thinking to myself, man, everybody I know is going to see this now. And there's a part of me that was just like, I didn't want it, but there was also a part of me that was just like, you know what? I'm ready. I'm ready for this.
Mm.
And what happened at that moment when that hit, and all of a sudden I had these Marines, a lot of them that I had lost touch with, that started to return and share how much they were uplifted by that story.
Wow.
Um, it awakened this hunger in me
Mm.
to again lead. And I was finally starting to learn where Matt Engel, the one that didn't have the combat experience, that didn't have, the muscles upon my muscles, that didn't have necessarily all of these amazing things that these amazing leaders I had seen
Right.
lead men and women in combat have, I finally started to realize that I did have something that men and women long to have. I
Wow.
had a wound that had been redeemed. And I
Mm.
could be that guide. And it wasn't something that exhausted me.
Yeah.
Rather, it was something that just filled me, and it made me feel fully alive.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually, I hunkered down and I put a program together. And the
Mm-hmm.
name of that program is called Warriors Redemption. Warriors Redemption. You can find that warriorsredemption.com. And it's a program where really I developed it for veterans, first responders, and their spouses to give them an orientation to the language of their interior life. Because this is where this battle is taking place. It's no longer an enemy that you can fight with a gun or a sword here. It's a completely different enemy. It's an interior battle. And so often the problem is that people say, hey, you just got to talk it out, talk about it, talk about it. But it's kind of like asking somebody with a broken leg to walk to the hospital to get it fixed. We don't, so for so many of us, the language of our interior life is a foreign language. And so we can't necessarily put it into words in a way that's really healing and helpful, so that we can enter into those intimate conversations that do pave the way for deep healing, and not healing in the coping sort of sense, but healing that merciful love encounter brings you to a place beyond coping. A couple of months ago, I was at a Halloween party, and I was talking with a gentleman that worked for the VA, and he was a veteran himself. And while we were having a couple of drinks and kind of loosening up a little bit, we started to share stories. And I shared my story with him, the one I just shared. And he looked at me, he goes, Matt, like, man, that's rough. You must never sleep through the night. You must just have like terrible sleep problems. And I said, I sleep fine. I sleep fine. And he goes, well, then you probably got like wicked nightmares and stuff, at least. Like you sleep, but like you got nightmares and you're dealing with that. And I was like, no, I don't. And he goes, well, then are you drinking? Like, what are you doing? Are you drinking? You're on you're on meds, right? No. And I was looking at it. That was really a moment for me to see a man who really was working at the VA, and he's talking to veterans day in and day out. You would think he would really have encountered some people that had gone past coping, gotten beyond coping. And here it was, I was a unicorn to this guy. And, but I know it's real. And I know it's the journey that we're all called to make, to get beyond coping to a place of real healing, and not just healing in the sense of I'm whole, but healing in the sense that I can actually transform other people's lives with this gift that I've received.
So not just surviving, actually thriving.
Thriving, yeah, like positive psychology. And I'm so happy to see the positive psychology movement led by, Dr. Martin Seligman starting to make its way into resiliency training, into the armed forces here. I think it's going to do a lot of good. But ultimately, we can get tons of training, but it'll all boil down to this: being able to sit across from somebody without any masks, being completely emotionally naked, vulnerable with this person, and just be received by this person in love, and be loved by this person and not condemned, and allowing that love to just transform you.
Whoa, that is, I don't even know what to say after this. We'll just drop the mic, leave that right there. But Matt, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience and the journey that you have been through, and how that journey has transformed you and now transformed so many others. I know that people are going to hear this and are going to want to know how they can walk maybe some of that with you, or to begin their own healing journey, or to just have hope. How can they reach you?
Yeah, no, thank you. And when we put this up on YouTube, if we can put a link to the site here, but I would say just you go to warriorsredemption.com, www.warriorsredemption, all one word, no apostrophe in there, warriorsredemption.com. At the very least, you can just sign up for a newsletter. I pass out some warrior notes, and that's just kind of some pieces that I've learned. I've dropped some lessons that are along the way. But if you're ready to really kind of go through this, the program itself, Warriors Redemption, it's 29 lessons. Just complete it under a month, but it's a self-paced program where really there's some worksheets that are helping you to dive in to some of this. And it's not about looking back to the past. Like, there's elements of looking to the past
Right.
only really in the light of really understanding how we can see it in the context of the future that we desire to have. But really with Warriors Redemption, we're going forward. It's not a clinical program, I got to say. I'm not a clinician here. I'm just a man that certainly has found a way, and I know that others have found success and some healing and a road to thriving with some of the points that I put out and the lessons that I've been able to share here. But I with the program, I take it and just boil down to some short video lessons that you can watch every single day. A worksheet goes with each one of those lessons that are just kind of helping you apply it to your own life. And then really ultimately when you're done, just being able to see your story um, in an integrated way, not looking at your past as something to be hidden, but looking at it as really something ultimately where it's no longer an anchor for you, but it's an asset to becoming the best person, the best version of yourself. Really a true warrior, a warrior redeemed, hence the name here.
That's
So
beautiful.
warriorsredemption.com.
I love
Please go
that.
there. Very affordable. I want to make sure this was something that price was never a barrier for somebody to get involved here. Um, Please go check it out.
Good. Well, again, you guys, I don't know for you, but for me, it just reminded me how much we all have our stories and we all have our moments of shame and our moments of things in our lives that maybe we want to hide or we want to push aside. But to recognize that those moments of pain and shame and heartache, all the things that happens in this journey called life, that there is hope, and that is part of our redemption. Is through that our pain really can lead to our passion and to our purpose. So come find us on social media, From Pain to Passion, because we go from pain, and if we let it, into our passion and our purpose, and that's powerful. So come find us. If you have a story going from a painful season to and that space ended up leading you into your passion and your purpose, we'd love to hear about that and potentially get you on our YouTube and on our podcast. So please feel free to send us a message. The email is actually from pain to passion at gmail.com, or you can leave a note on here as well. And you guys have an awesome day. Matt, thank you again. Time is so precious, and we just appreciate you spending some time with us.
Pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye, guys.